Great. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this joint webinar between ERN Reconnect and Lupus Europe. So, we've just been at EULAR, and we have some exciting news about lupus. We had many great experiences, and we're going to try and cover both the healthcare professional, the doctors, and the patients in this webinar. So hopefully we'll do the program justice. We'll give our takeaways anyway. So joining me tonight is Professor Laurent Arnaud. Good evening. So you're muted.
Good evening.
So Laurent and I will try and go through some points, and we will also see some videos from patient representatives from Lupus Europe who were attending EULAR. So let's move on. Okay, Laurent, you want to begin? Or should I?
Sure. I thought you had a video you wanted to show after
No.
Oh, so this is very general, just to say that indeed we are back from EULAR and it was in Milan. So just to show you where the meeting was, and it was actually an enormous structure. So I don't know where's your feedback, but we walked quite a lot actually.
Oh yes, many patients were completely exhausted by the end of EULAR.
I think we did several kilometers in a day. So I'm just showing a few slides. You just tell me if you wish to comment and move on to the next slide.
Yeah, so here we see the booth of Lupus Europe. We had a lot of people coming by and listening to news about lupus and the different projects we're doing in Lupus Europe as well. And sort of the big thing for Lupus Europe this year was that we had one of our abstracts actually presented in the opening plenary abstract session about Lupus 100. And we're going to talk a bit more about that later.
So this is the slide I have. Is there something to do with this?
I think Jeanette is muted for a second. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, you are muted, Jeanette.
Sorry, yes. I was trying to talk, it didn't work. Yes, if you press next, there should be some photos. So one at a time. The first one is actually Alain Cornet, our then General Secretary, actually won the Power Best Abstract Award, which I think is great. Next one is from the Lupus 100, a step change in access to quality information for European lupus patients, presented by Zoe. Really great presentation. Next one is Alain presenting a poster on patient-doctor communication gap, and this was actually in the scientific program poster tour. The next one is Amy giving an oral presentation on Lupus Europe's PAN, so Patient Advisory Network, a huge double success, which was in the Power program. And this was the one that won the Best Abstract Award. The next one is Russo, who's also connected to Lupus Europe. She did an oral presentation of the Pediatric World Nephritis Day campaign. And of course, next one, we also had some panel discussions. The next one is Francesca and Lena. They have presented a poster on access to education, also about the lupus100.org in the scientific program. And the next one is Delilah, presenting on the association between diagnosis delay and disease activity with burden of the disease in 4,150 European patients with lupus. And that was also in the scientific program. The next one was my own presentation in a fishbowl session, also in the scientific program, on my journey to the specialists of my rheumatic disease. And the last one, we did a lot of networking. So patients were everywhere, as you can imagine, doing a lot of different things. So now I think we have a video we want to share.
Okay, so I'm stopping sharing the screen.
This is with some general feedback from patients about the Congress.
I'm the first time in EULAR, so for me it's not only the first day, EULAR 23, but also first day in EULAR in general. So it's very good impression. It's everything very good organized and interesting sessions. So probably the most important message for me in this during this first day of EULAR was that almost in every session the speakers and the questions were about treat to target concept. So how to practically help the individual patient. So it's not it's about everything. Actually, it was about the patient and me being as a patient here. It was a very nice and really hopeful sign.
I'm very grateful that I was able to participate in the EULAR Congress. This was my second time in this conference. As the PAN and as the Lupus Europe, we promote the website for a patient with lupus, lupus100.org. And we talked about it for doctors and patients so that everyone who is interested has access to reliable knowledge about lupus. For me, the Congress itself is a big dose of new knowledge, especially new perspective and treatment options for lupus, which gives hope for many patients. But above all, it's new contacts and new opportunities for cooperations to do even better for people with lupus.
I'm very happy to take part in this great convention. I had the chance to see very interesting presentations, and also I had the chance to present the big campaign we did in Cyber and for a big awareness for people with RMDs.
What EULAR 2023 gave to me, it was new experience in communication during sharing leaflets with Lupus 100. Some people showed really great interest. What was the most surprised for me, that patients and doctors outside of Europe look for Lupus Europe support, helping to create patient organizations, and even more wider, to become part of Lupus Europe family. There were some questions like, is it possible that Lupus Europe will be translated to Arabic languages, keeping in mind that a lot of Arabic people live in Europe? Also, there were questions to be translated to Russian language as well. It was a really friendly atmosphere. It helped me to build new relations. And it's so incredible feeling to know that we all here for the same purpose and improving the lives of patients, bridging the gaps between science and daily patient care. So lovely Congress.
Okay.
Yeah, I think there was some really great impressions from a lot of patients. So, Laurent, will you tell us a little bit about the doctor perspective?
Yeah, but I think that was really great feedback. And we as doctors, we're always very happy when patients are around. And I think you're very right. It was a great opportunity to talk all together, to meet actually. And the SLE Euro booth was really next to the Lupus Europe booth. And I've seen lots of interest, lots of interactions, especially for the Lupus White Book and the Lupus 100. So many people going around. I think that was really amazing, actually. So maybe I can give you some feedback on the more medical side, and I will do my best to say it in a very lay language for everybody to understand. So if you think, Jeanette, that I'm not clear enough or simple enough, please just tell me, and I will try to explain in more details.
I will.
The first thing I just wanted to highlight is that I really felt a strong interest for lupus in this edition of EULAR 2023. I have just quoting the numbers below, 50 or almost 50 official presentations, more than 100 posters just about lupus. So that was great. And the sessions were completely packed. My impression was actually that the rooms were too small. All the session I attended, there were people everywhere standing behind and everything was full. Was this the same in the session you attended, Jeanette?
Yes, every time there was something about lupus or connective tissue diseases, rooms were packed.
Yeah, this is absolutely my impression. So maybe this is feedback for you, Lar. There's a great interest. The patients are here. We want more space. I think this is what we need to achieve. So there've been a lot of talks, and so I have tried to make screen captures and assemble them in an order that is logical for everybody to understand. And the first step I'd like to talk about, because I think there are some great studies, is this step. We know that lupus is a rare disease, but it does not happen randomly. You need a special background, a combination of genetics, a combination of environmental factors, and it is absolutely crucial to understand who will develop lupus. And there was a great study about that. But just before, I'd like to say a word about a session which I thought was really great. It was precision medicine. I don't know if you were there, Jeanette, this specific session.
No, unfortunately, I wasn't. I didn't attend many sessions because I was networking all the time.
Yeah, there was lots of sessions, including sessions at the same time. So I don't think everybody could see everything. But that was really great. And basically, the idea is, how can we move forward in the context of lupus? Can we find biomarkers to understand better who is going to have some specific complications? Can we reclassify autoimmune disease? So that was a great session. And it was completely packed. People were everywhere. So lots of interest. And Marta Alarcón-Riquelme, she works in Granada in Spain. And she presented beautiful studies about the reclassification, molecular reclassification of lupus. That was very impressive. So this is really the study I want to tell you about. This is a study from Greece, from the team of George Bertsias. And really the idea is, can we try to guess from someone who is at risk of lupus, who is actually going to develop lupus? And so for that, he studied a cohort of what we will call the high-risk individuals for SLE. And basically, it is people from the general population, but who have autoantibodies, anti-nuclear antibodies, ANA, but no formal criteria for lupus, or first-degree relative of persons with lupus. And you know, because of the genetics, that there's a high risk of the family. Actually, 10% of cases are familial cases. So this group of people, there's around 65 people, nobody actually has lupus, but everybody is a high-risk individual. And what is really great with the study is that the Greek team will prospectively monitor these persons. So I'm not saying patients, because these persons are really healthy individuals. They are at risk, but they don't have SLE. And we see 5 years later what happens. So this is in the little boxes here. You have 36 non-progressors, 36 progressors, and there are also healthy controls. And based on that, they study the genetics actually, and they show several things. So what we are really interested in here is who is going to be a progressor, meaning who is going to get classified as SLE. And there are lots of things going on, but of course there is a deregulation of the interferon type 1 pathway. And this is very important because, as you know, and we'll talk more about that later, but interferons type 1 is a very important cytokine in the context of lupus. So there's already in these healthy individuals who are at risk an abnormal expression of interferons type 1, and that is very, very important. And this is really what I want to show you, is what are the predictors of progression. And there are two main predictors. The first one is to be a first-degree relative of someone with lupus. So in the cohort, not everybody was first-degree relative, but the fact to be first-degree relative multiplied by 2.21 the risk to develop lupus. So that is bad luck. You cannot do anything about your genetics. You cannot change it. So we have to take it. But what we can change is the second line. This is smoking, being a former smoker multiplied by the same as the genetic 2.15 the risk to get SLE. And this is, I think, a very, very, very important message, that we should absolutely not smoke in the context of being with ANA, high-risk individuals for lupus, because it drives the progression towards lupus. So I don't know if you have feedback about that, Jeanette, but I think this is really interesting because it's one of the first study to really predict who's going to get lupus.
It's really, really interesting, I think. And it will be interesting to see how this develops as well. So we can hopefully find some more signals we can look for, and maybe potentially begin treatment even before diagnosis, which we know the earlier we can make the diagnosis, the better the prognosis is. So definitely really interesting. And about the smoking, we know that smoking when you have lupus reduces the effect of the medication and also makes the lupus progress worse. But now we have a case before you get the diagnosis as well. So smoking is bad no matter who you are.
Absolutely. So just to rebound on that, there are two slides that I wanted to show. So these are from my personal studies, but this is a study we did with François Chasset in France, who is a dermatologist specialized in lupus. Smoking reduces by 50% the probability to be a responder to plaquenil hydroxychloroquine for the skin. So minus 50% if you are a smoker compared to non-smoker. So that's a big difference. And actually, we already knew that smoking was a risk factor for SLE. This is a meta-analysis that we did a few years ago. The increase in the risk of lupus is actually by 50%, which is an enormous increase. But the way that George Spurtius has shown is very much in one study, which is a prospective study. So it's even more robust. So this is a very, very good reason not to smoke in the context of lupus in general. I'm sure it's a question that is included in Lupus 100, actually.
Yeah, it is.
So the second point I wanted to discuss is everything related to disease activity, damage, and so on, because there are lots of things about treat to target, and this is very related. So just to make it clear for everybody, disease activity are the manifestations due to lupus that are potentially reversible. If you have arthritis, you treat, it disappears. If you have serositis, for instance, pericarditis, you treat, it disappears. By contrast, damage are irreversible lesions. This is slightly evolving, but the idea is that if you have osteoporosis due to corticosteroids, of course you can treat, but in a way it's there. So that's a very important distinction between disease activity and damage. And this is really the focus I want to do, because there are lots of studies about damage. So this is not presented at EULAR. You can see it's a paper for 2003, but I think it is very beautifully illustrated the problems we are talking about. You see damage accrual with time. What you have on the left panel here is actually the damage score on the vertical axis, and what you have on the horizontal panel is the time. And you see that with time, even very early, unfortunately, persons with lupus will accrue damage. And of course, this is what we don't want. But I think it is very, very well illustrated in this study. And of course, the worst damage we can think of is death. And so I have chosen to talk about that more in the beginning, because this is not, I would say, very friendly news, but I think it's interesting what has been shown. So the first point is that, as you know, the survival in SLE is excellent, more than 95% of survival at 10 years. So the overall prognosis of the disease is very good. But we know that there's a gap, and unfortunately, a few patients will die, and that is always very, very sad studies. And so there was a very, very important study that was presented by the Spanish group from RELECER. RELECER is the national database for lupus in Spain. And this is about the reasons for dying with lupus. But there are some good news. The first one is that they surveyed different time periods until 1980, the 1990s, and now more recently. And what you can see is that the general trend is that it is decreasing. So that is the first news. We already have good outcomes during the last decades, but now it's even getting better. And the second point, and I think this is why the study is interesting, is that they report the cause of death. And you see it's color-coded, but what you have in blue is death to lupus activity. What you have in yellow is death to infections. You see that cancer is going down, probably because we are screening people better and better. In red is cardiovascular events. Everybody knows that the cardiovascular risk is increased in lupus. And in gray, we don't know. But what you can see is that everything is going down. And I think especially cardiovascular mortality, because we are screening better, we are giving cholesterol blockers if needed, treating diabetes is needed. So I think this is much, much improved over the, I'd say, 2 or 3 last decades.
Yeah, and we actually have some questions. I think maybe we should take one of them now because it's connected to this survival rate.
Sure, absolutely.
So, Alan asks, what is the average population survival rate at 10 years?
So the average, are you talking about the general population, or are you talking about persons with lupus?
Persons with lupus.
So there is a little, but it depends where you are. Areas, especially low and middle income countries. So I'm thinking Central America, Latin America. On some occasion, it can be higher because access to care is not the same.
Yeah.
But in Europe is 90-95% at 10 years. This is the survival rate, of course.
That's very encouraging to know.
Yeah, it's a very good news. Just to remind you, because I think that's important, before corticosteroids, unfortunately, 50% of persons with lupus were dead 1 year after the diagnosis. And in 1995, so it's 55, sorry, we were starting to have new drugs coming. The survival rate at 5 years is 50%. So now it's more than 95% at 10 years. So this is incredibly better.
And Laurent, how does that compare to a person not having lupus?
So we have some very rigorous data. Unfortunately, it's multiplied by 2 to 3 compared to the population of same age, same sex. Okay. So it remains much higher than the general population.
Okay, thank you very much.
Do we have other questions about that theme, or shall I move forward?
We have some about smoking from before, so
sure.
let's take them now. Mm-hmm. So you talked about when you're a smoker or you're past smoker. What about secondhand smoker?
So there are very, very little data for that. There's data in oncology for lung cancer, but for lupus, the data are very limited. When we pooled the data in the meta-analysis, we found no robust information about that. So I cannot give you a very clear answer for that.
No, I wasn't expecting.
My guess is that it's not healthy, but we cannot prove there's a relationship for now.
No. And the other question is, could lupus activity decrease when you quit smoking?
When we quit smoking. So we don't have data for that, but there are reasons to think that tobacco smoking contributes to the activation of the immune system. So I'd say this is an additional reason why people should not smoke. Of course, there's the cardiovascular risk, the oncogenic risk. Thrombosis is already high, especially with antiphospholipid antibodies. So definitely we should not smoke. But I do think that there's an additional role in the control of disease activity. Just to make this clear, we said it before, the efficacy of treatment is decreased in smokers. So by stopping smoking, we improve the way the treatments will work. So I think it helps to control disease activity.
Yeah, I think you're right. No more questions.
Okay, so let's move forward with Lupus 100. Do you want to provide a bit of feedback? I'd like to provide feedback on the next slide, which I think is a bit provocative.
Okay, so we presented the Lupus 100 initiative, which is a website. It's been created on the basis of a French book created, I think, 10 years ago, with 100 questions from lupus patients answered by lupologists, so professors in lupus. We thought that was a great idea. We wanted to do something with that for many years. So finally, now we have the people and the power to do it. So we translated the French book into English, removed some of the very Frenchy stuff, put some.
I don't know what you're talking about.
No, right. and added some new questions that are more European, and also, of course, updated it. So making sure that new treatments were in there, new data, new facts. Then after having that in English and putting it on the website, so website is called www.lupus100.org. On that website, you can find the English version, but you can also find 11 other languages at the moment, and we are expanding all the time with other languages. So have a look at the website and see if you can find it in your own language. It should have answers to the most common questions. In time, there will also be an opportunity to maybe add some new questions, so you can write us if you have any ideas. And if you didn't get the website, it's lupus100.org, and then you can click on your flag. I think this is really good, a really good way to avoid all that fake information that's online nowadays, where you read, for instance, old research about 5% survival rate and so on. So this is actually updated, reliable news done in collaboration between lupus doctors and patients.
I think that is such a great initiative, because hoax, fake information or bad medical information is really everywhere. And also, when you go to a web page about a disease, you have the catalog of all manifestations possible, and this is very, very frightening. So I think I've had the privilege to read the book. It is very, very well designed, and it answers questions in a very clear language. So I think that is great. Yeah,
and not only for patients, but actually also doctors find it useful.
Absolutely, so I'm not surprised, actually.
Not everyone is a lupus specialist, right?
Absolutely. So I just wanted to provide feedback on this, because I think it was very, very provocative. Everybody was talking about this study. Who is better at answering questions? Is this doctors, physicians, or is this automated systems, computers, chatbots? And well, unfortunately for us doctors, I think the patients were much more satisfied with the empathy and the length of detail of the answers that were provided by the chatbots based on artificial intelligence. So I think it is worth mentioning, because it was a very, very provocative study, but it probably shows that we should find new ways to communicate, inform, and maybe automated systems in the future can help. I don't think it can replace a medical a patient relationship, but maybe it can help on some situations. What do you think, Jeanette? Would you go to a chatbot?
Oh, no, I wouldn't. I prefer the doctor. But you're right. It does highlight the issue with the communication, I think, that needs to improve, which we are also working on. So we'll have better tools in the future, hopefully. And hopefully this won't be the case next time they want to make such an investigation.
Sounds good to me. So then I think we said before, but there were lots of talks about treat to target. So I just wanted to recap what it is, because I'm not sure everybody's familiar with the concept. Treat to target is that you treat with the idea to reach a target. And this target, you start by setting it first. So in the context of lupus, we're going to talk about that in a minute, but it's basically remission. You want to treat to reach remission. And the idea is that you treat, you check whether the target is reached. If the target is reached, you're happy, and maybe you will start to decrease the treatments after some times. But if the target is not reached, then you will change the treatments to treat better. That's the idea of treat to target. And I must say that we're going to talk about the new EULAR recommendations, but the main target of treatment is remission. So I'll show you what it is in a minute, but I just want you to look at this. It's really a target. The center is remission, around is active disease, and then in between, we have something which is called low disease activity. And Eric Laurent, this is the group of Australia, Melbourne, has proposed a definition for what could be low disease activity, and it's called the LLDAS, Lupus Low Disease Activity State. So the definitions are quite technical, they are quite complicated. We are not going to dig too much into the details today, but I just want to show you something because it was a great talk that Eric Laurent did. When you look at the target of LLDAS, low disease activity, actually you see that remission is included in it. So patients in LLDAS comprise a subset of patients in remission. And it's been proven that being in low disease activity is good, but what we didn't know if it was good because it contains remission or if it was good by itself. And so what the team of Eric Laurent did is that they assessed separately LLDAS, including, not including remission and remission. And it shows that if you are in LLDAS, low disease activity, even if you are not in remission, you will get the good properties of the LLDAS. So that is a very important step forward because some people thought, especially doctors, that actually it was remission included in LLDAS that conferred the good properties of this low disease activity state. So this is a bit technical, probably my most technical slide, but I think it's a great step forward in the demonstration of the way it works. I don't know if you have questions about that.
No, I don't see any questions. I just have a comment that is really also reassuring for patients because we know many patients have really big difficulties reaching remission.
Absolutely.
But they might reach LLDAS and that's enough. So that's good enough.
Yes.
That's good to know.
So my point of view is that the main target is remission because you will have more properties with remission. But if indeed, for different reasons, remission is not achievable, then LLDAS is okay. I must say something. When we are talking about LLDAS here, it means more than 50% of the time spent in LLDAS. So it's not just LLDAS once, it's a durable state of LLDAS. That is slightly different, but it brings up the same properties. And actually, I can show you the curve. You can see the blue one, which is LLDAS including remission, and the green one here is LLDAS without remission, and you see it's almost the same. So that is very, very good news. Then I'd like to say a word about corticosteroid. This is a study I presented, but we all know that corticosteroids are a huge, huge challenge in lupus and that we are taking too much corticosteroids. So actually, we did a study called Lupin F in the French population. Actually, you know that when you go to the hospital or to a consultation in France, actually what has been prescribed is recorded in a huge database. So we could extract all persons actually living with lupus in France. I'm just showing you the number is a bit more than 31,000. So this is a very, very big sample. And we studied the mean dose of cortisone, here is prednisone, during 1 year, which is 2019. And you can see that during this year, 51%, 52% of the persons with lupus did not receive any corticosteroid at all. This is oral corticosteroids. Then you see that 35% were between 0 and 5 milligrams per day, Again, this is the mean dose over the year, not the dose that was given at a given point. And you know that when you go more than 5 milligrams per day as a mean dose, there is the risk of damage. And so it was reassuring to see that, I can't say only, but around 12% of persons received more than 5 milligrams as a mean. So that is too high, but not too high. It's not like 1/3 of patients were in that target. It is less, is around 10%. So these are good data. What was not nice, unfortunately, is that if we look at the persons receiving corticosteroids, 14% of them only had corticosteroids, no other drug for lupus, no hydroxychloroquine, no immunosuppressive agent, no biologic, no nothing, just cortisone, and that is not good. 14%.
No, that's a lot. Yeah. But it's good to see that you have a lot of patients who are actually not on steroids, who
Yes.
can find other treatments, or it doesn't need any treatments. So
that's absolutely what it means.
Yeah.
Other persons being in remission and they don't need corticosteroids anymore, or they needed corticosteroids, but we find ways with immunosuppressive agents and so on to control the disease well enough.
Yeah.
And actually, I'll be very brief on that one because it's a bit technical, but it is really very much about how can we stop corticosteroids, especially when we go down and we reach 5 milligrams. And there's always these questions to know where you reach 5 milligrams, you have no active disease, but what we call lupus serology is positive. So it is anti-DS DNA antibodies, a low complement. The question is, when you reach 5 and you have these markers, do you need to stop or do you need to go on? And these are very, very reassuring data. It shows that if you decrease corticosteroids, the disease will not flare up. You will get less damage. And of course, that hydroxychloroquine is protective against the flares. So this was a great, great study from the Asia Pacific collaboration. Very, very interested audience with lots of questions.
Yeah, I bet, because we know that doctors really want, and patients also want to reduce the prednisolone or the all corticosteroids, and they really want us to take hydroxychloroquine. Both these things are now proven. It's safe to go down for most patients, and hydroxychloroquine is just a really good protection.
I fully agree. There were lots of posters, lots of talks about the immense benefits of hydroxychloroquine in lupus. Lots of talks about that.
Yeah. I have a question about before we move on to your very interesting project in a bit. We talked about LLDAS. So Sophia wants to know if there's different. Do we know the levels of quality of life for patients with LLDAS? And what's the difference in relation to patients in remission?
So it was not reported in this specific study, but there are data showing that when you reach LLDAS, the quality of life is improved better than not reaching LLDAS. And this is the same with remission, but it has not been compared one to the other. I'm not aware of a study doing that. What is key is that reaching LLDAS is, of course, better control of the disease, and it's significant improvement in quality of life. It's demonstrated.
So Natalia wants to know, so not more than 5 milligrams of prednisolone is advised with the target of stopping it? Is that
correct.
Right?
These are the new EULAR recommendations. We'll talk about that in the end. But the new target now is 5 milligrams of prednisone maximum.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. Now we can move on to LEAF.
Yeah, but I'll be very brief because with Reconnect, we've done a webinar on fatigue. So I just wanted to say that Lou has done an amazing job. She presented the study, I think, very, very beautifully. Just to remind everybody, but Lupus Europe was very much part of this. We've been very privileged, more than 1,250 persons with lupus trying LEAF. And I just wanted to highlight a few results. And this one in particular, it's a correlate.
You need to briefly explain what LEAF is.
Absolutely. So, you know, it's a computerized system that measures fatigue. So you answer questions that are using validated PROs. It measures fatigue using different scales, and then it assesses quality of life, sleep, pain, physical activity, stress, anxiety, depression, and it gives you your own personalized profile. And this is completely online on a computer, so you can do it on your living room. And this was developed by my team, but we really think that this is a new way to deal with this complicated manifestations, which is fatigue. So that was the first step to help patients to have the opportunity to do that at home. And this slide, I think, is very important because it's fatigue assessed across 3 different scales, 0 to 10, one scale that is called the MFI, and another one which is called fatigue. And what you can see is that here is more severe and here is more minor. And each dot is a person who has answered. And you can see how the dots are scattered, but are regrouped in the, I would say, moderate to severe side of the scale. You see that there are very few dots on no fatigue. The cloud is very much towards severe fatigue. So I think that is a very important message. And then I'll be very brief about the results because we've presented them again. But, you know, it assesses comorbidities, and you can see that there were very high level of these comorbidities, high level of clinical depression, high level of anxiety, of pain. So I think it really shows that we need to work all together to improve these outcomes. This is the main message I wanted to say tonight. We have already presented the data, so I just wanted to recap what I think is crucial.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really interesting also look into what is behind fatigue. It's not only fatigue, it's a lot of other areas that sort of interact with each other, right, and create the fatigue. So Natalia is asking what LEAF means in French. So it's an abbreviation, I think,
in
right?
English, it's the Lupus Expert System for the Assessment of Fatigue.
Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure. So thank you very much to you, to Lupus Europe, but also to everybody who has participated to this tool, because this is for you, but this has to be done with you. This is where we want it. So it's a very beautiful collaborative work, I think.
It is.
CAR T cells, that is so important. Everybody's talking about CAR T cells. So Georg Schett gave a very, very beautiful lecture. But before I show the results, I just wanted to show you one slide to be sure that everybody understands what we're talking about. It's a new type of treatment. For now, it is limited to very refractory cases because it is a bit dangerous for now, and it's very, very expensive. So you take some bloods from someone with lupus who is very, very sick, a refractory patient, and you take the white cells. And these white cells, in vitro, in the lab, you will modify them. Basically, it's called transfection with a virus. So you insert a virus, and the virus will inject some new DNA inside. So it's a genetic modifications to the cells. And the reason why you want to do that is that these cells will now express a new marker or a new receptor for a target of interest. And in the context of lupus, the main target of interest is CD19. It's a marker that is on the B cells, B lymphocytes. And these CAR T cells, so you have them in the laboratory. They are the cells of the same patients from the beginning. You expand them in vitro, so they multiply. And basically, you re-inject them to the same person. So it's not a treatment for someone else. It's a personal treatment. Taking your white cells, making some genetic modification, expanding them, and reinserting them. And so Georg Schett has updated us on the results of the first 7 patients in the world treated with this treatment for lupus. So just to show you, these were pretty young patients, as you can see. This is the age, a huge majority of females, different disease duration. But what is really striking to me is that all the treatments failed before for each of these patients. So lots of failures. And these were actually patients with refractory lupus nephritis, because everybody had a lupus nephritis. And the results are really, really amazing. All the patients reached the DORIS remission, and for now, all the patients are in a drug-free state. So I think there's a lot of hope with these therapies. As I said, only 7 patients. It is not indicated in lupus. This is research. We need a randomized control trial. It is very costly. It is technically quite difficult, but maybe in the future, it will be something really transforming for lupus. And I'm really crossing my fingers, actually. These are really amazing results.
Yeah, and I think the lupus population has already sort of smelled the air of this and is seeing a new hope. And we don't want to raise the hope too much right now, because as you say, it's still very much experimental.
Yes, many limitations.
Yeah, so we're looking forward to seeing the results of trials coming up, which are already been put in place. So it will be interesting to see what the future brings. But this is indeed very promising.
So indeed, it is not possible to go to your lupus specialist and say, can I have CAR T cells? This is definitely not working for now. But these preliminary data are impressive for refractory and very severe cases. Let's wait for the phase 3 results, actually.
Yes.
Then there were lots of talks about lupus nephritis. And I just want to highlight one result, which I think is very, very striking. Because you know that when we follow up lupus nephritis in time to ensure that persons with lupus are actually getting treated well and going better, we follow proteinuria, 24-hour proteinuria. And this study by Andrea Fava shows that there are many, many markers, new biomarkers, which performed better than proteinuria. Proteinuria is in red here, and everything that is here is performing better. But what is a bit sad is that these markers, they are laboratory markers, and they are not incorporated in real life in the patient pathways. So this is why I call the slide, innovative biomarkers need to be translated for routine care. And this is our work as clinician researchers, that this does not stay in a lab, it has to come to real life.
And how do you examine for those antibodies?
So not
Those
all
markers.
of them are antibodies,
No,
but
markers,
I mean,
sorry.
the technologies are there, actually. It can be measured quite easily at the laboratory. These are either surface markers or measurement you can do in the blood or in the urine. What you have here is the change between baseline and month 3. That's the best predictor for response. But these techniques, they exist. Simply, they are not used as a routine laboratory assay for these markers.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to get to, that you can do it by blood test or by urine samples. So it's actually not more invasive for the patient, and there's actually not a reason why we don't use them, other than we need to have a routine in the laboratory to do it.
Absolutely. So this is why I think it's important to highlight this, is that we need to fast forward daily care and not only do research in the lab.
Yeah. So we have 2 questions about the CAR T cell. So Dorothy wants to know if CD19 neutralizes interferon.
So it's not studied like that, but because there's a relationship between disease activity as a whole and the interferon signature, it's the case, but in an indirect manner. Yeah.
So you don't see any traces afterwards. Yeah. The results of interferon. Yeah. So, and Blanca says she could see that the patients were medication-free. Does that include hydroxychloroquine?
Yes. It was complete stop of treatments, actually.
Yeah. Great.
So that is quite impressive.
Yeah, it is. Thank you.
So maybe I just wanted to update you, but very, very briefly, about the new talks about the new drugs. These are phase 2 studies, so it's too early to decide anything. But I think it's great to know that a combination of treatment, one is called elsubrutinib, and it's a BTK inhibitor, something that inhibits a signaling marker in B cells. And this one, upadacitinib, is a JAK inhibitor. So it's actually the combination. And in this phase 2 study, it was shown to be efficacious. So maybe if it's a positive phase 3 in the future, we will have another treatment strategy for lupus. So we're crossing the fingers. And the other one was this one, but this one is a phase 3 study. So very interesting, but in a specific group. It was performed in China, only in China. So we need to replicate outside of China. But this treatment called telitacicept, you see that it works very strong. The difference between this arm, telitacicept, and the red one, which is placebo, is very, very high, more than 35 points. It has almost never been seen in the context of lupus. So I think this is really why we need to replicate the study in a different concept. But this is interesting, and well, there's a bit of hope with these new treatments.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much.
Maybe now I think it's great to move on to the lupus recommendations, because that was really the highlight. You know that the EULAR recommendations from SLE, they date back from 2019. And so we've been working, I'm part of this group, but it's led by our Greek colleagues, especially Dimitrios Boumpas, really to fast forward this and update these recommendations based on the new evidence. And as you can see, the rooms were very, very full. I
just want to say one thing, that actually this time there was a patient included in the working group. So we've been working as a team, which was really great, I think.
I agree. So Jeanette, you are actually part of these group. And I think it is a very, very interesting opportunity, because it's always the same. We need to cross the points of view. That's how we make the recommendations better. Exactly. And especially for these overarching principles. So maybe I can read them briefly, and maybe you can comment if you think. The first one, point A, is that SLE requires a multidisciplinary and personalized management with lots of things: patients' education, shared decision-making, and to take into consideration the costs to patient and society. So this is quite new. I like it.
Yeah, I really like it. It's very much patient-focused, I think. And
I think so too, actually.
The good thing about it, yeah.
The second point is that it's important to assess disease activity. It was said before, but now it is recommended to assess disease activity every time at each clinic, and also to assess damage. So we've been talking before about disease activity and damage. These should be assessed using validated instruments.
Yeah, and I think that's what some doctors forget, that you have to keep measuring, because you don't know how the patient is actually doing. If they say, I'm doing fine, you shouldn't rely on that alone. You should also test.
Point number C is the non-pharmacologic intervention. So again, I think we emphasize that sun protection, smoking cessation, diet, good diet, exercise, this is very important for general health, especially in the context of lupus.
Yeah, I think it's even more important when you have lupus, right? Because then it really makes a difference on how you feel.
The point D is about the treatments. And basically the idea of this point D is to say that the type of treatment we choose, it should be adapted, dependent upon the patient characteristics, the type and the severity of organ involvement, and of course the comorbidity and the risk factors. So this is very much personalized treatment based on severity.
And this should go without saying, right? This is natural.
I think so.
Yeah.
But I'd say it's even better to say it, actually.
It is better to say it.
That was the idea of this point D. E is early lupus diagnosis, especially lupus nephritis. We don't want to discover lupus nephritis late. So it means that we need regular checkup to be sure that we do not have complications going on, especially in the kidney, but not only in the kidney.
Yes, and definitely keep examining. That's the way to go forward, I think. Yes.
So these are the overarching principles. So these are like very general points. And then there are some specific recommendations which are a bit more technical. There are 13 of them. So it's on 2 slides. Maybe we are not going to look at every one of them in detail, but maybe I want to highlight at least the first 2 or 3 recommendations, because I think they are the most important one.
I agree.
The first one is really about hydroxychloroquine. Before we were talking a bit more about antimalarials. Now we're really saying hydroxychloroquine, and it's recommended for all lupus patients if it's not contraindicated. For the first time, we recommend a dose, which is the usual dose, but we say that it should be individualized. And that is important because in some countries, such as France, we use a little bit more. And also we take into account the risk of retinal toxicity. I've been tweeting about that. It's a trade-off between the dose and the risk of flare. So I think that's a great improvement.
We actually had a question earlier about, you mentioned at one point in an earlier presentation, there's an alternative to hydroxychloroquine, to Plaquenil, right?
So hydroxychloroquine is Plaquenil.
Yeah.
There's another one which is chloroquine,
yes.
but now in most countries it's getting more and more difficult to find.
Exactly.
The problem is the risk of retinal toxicity. It's much, much higher. And then there's something called mepocrine or quinacrine. It's the same. This is not very widely available. It's available in the UK, for instance, not in France, not in Canada. It has some nice properties, but there are some side effects, not on the eye, but it changes the color of the skin. So it's not an ideal drug, I'd say.
Thank you.
The statement number 2 very much connects everything we said. It's coming back again to corticosteroids, that we should use corticosteroids, especially for the dose, based on the type of the severity of the organ involvement. And what we mean here is that it should not be 1 milligram per kilogram for everybody on all occasion. It should really be taking into account the severity of the manifestation. That is so crucial.
Yeah.
The second point is the chronic use. Before, in 2019, it was recommended to stop, and if you cannot stop, to go below 7.5 milligram per day of prednisone. And I think almost everybody thought it was too high. So I'm very, very happy that the statement number 2 changes this down to 5 milligram. So it's no corticosteroid if possible, and if this is not possible, is maximum 5 milligram per day.
Yeah, and I totally agree. It's a good thing that we put it a bit lower.
There's a little sentence about the use of pulses of methylprednisolone, but I'll be brief about that because we are all using pulses in different situations, but the literature for the pulses is not so good. And I think it reflects in these numbers who show that this is not a very strong recommendation to use pulse. You may use pulses, but you have to know it's not formally validated in the context of lupus, except on very special circumstances.
Some doctors really rely on it and others don't use it at all. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And also the doses, is it 1 gram? Is it 500? It's so variable. So the idea is that if you wish to use pulses, you can use pulses, but let's say it's not formally validated or demonstrated as useful. The statement number 3, and I think this is one of the last one we're going to talk, but it's an interesting one, is about these new strategies, biologics, targeted treatments. When shall we use them? And so what we say is that you should start with hydroxychloroquine. And in patients not responding to hydroxychloroquine, either alone or with corticosteroids, or if you cannot reduce corticosteroids below what we've been saying before, 5 milligrams, then it is needed to add an immunomodulating drug or an immunosuppressive agent. So by this, we really mean the classical conventional immunosuppressive agents. So is methotrexate or azathioprine or mycophenolate, that's the kind of agent. And there's something subtle here is or biologic agents. And the idea with this is to allow, in some cases where it could be needed, to use biological agents. So for instance, belimumab or rituximab or anifrolumab before what it was used in the previous years, with the idea to treat earlier, actually, to use the window of opportunity. So that is a big change.
Yeah, and a good change, I think.
I think so. And then maybe I can just brief you through the other recommendations. we've been talking a bit about cyclophosphamide, especially when a disease is severe, about rituximab when it's refractory. So there are options in these circumstances. We've been updating the recommendations for the skin because there are new points. So it was interesting to rewrite these recommendations. We also updated the statement about neuropsychiatric lupus, I think, to make it more clear about what we should use. Immunosuppressive agents when it's inflammatory, and when we think that it could be thrombotic, then it's mostly aspirin or anticoagulant. So it's a bit different. So that is how it's written. And finally, the last recommendations, I think, are very, very technical, but they highlight new strategies or updated strategy for cytopenia, so low blood cells, especially low platelets, for lupus nephritis, the use of combination therapy with the new treatments, belimumab or voclosporin, for instance. We also made it more specific for the duration of these treatments. Before, it was not so clear for how long we had to go on with a maintenance treatment. And now it's very clear because there's a study called Win Lupus, which was published last year. It must be at least 3 years. And finally, there are also rescue procedures, just in case things are bad. We have a recommendation specific for severe cases of lupus nephritis. So in the end, I think that we really made clearer what was said before in the 2019 recommendations. It's not a complete change, it's an update. But I think that the points that were a bit technical and questionable before, the dose of corticosteroids, it's been much more improved and in line with the new data that we have.
And I think especially considering that these recommendations are, of course, for the specialists, but also for the non-specialists. It's really good that they now have more, that you now have to find many things that before was just a question of how you usually do it. For the new,
I agree. I think many things have been regrouped actually in this publication. Yeah. And usually it goes to ARD, Annals of the Rheumatic Disease, which is a big journal in rheumatology. And well, all the rheumatologists, but also any specialist interested can actually access and read this. Usually it's published as open access. So I think that's really good for the dissemination of the information.
And talking about that, Natalie is asking, where can I find these recommendations and how can I show them to my doctor?
Yes, they are not published yet, but I think they will be published very soon. It was just presented at EULAR, but I think in the next few months it will be online actually.
And we will put them on the Lupus Europe website when they get published.
Mm-hmm. Are you maybe thinking of making a lay version of these recommendations?
There will definitely be made a lay version. So let's see when it will be done and by whom, but we would definitely be involved.
Okay, thank you. So we are, I think, almost reaching the end of our debrief of EULAR. I have not talked about everything because you've seen that the huge interest for lupus, but I think I have selected what was the most important highlights. I don't know if we have questions. I suppose we do.
We have a few that weren't really on the topic. So yes, there's a curiosity about diet and microbiome, because in the past we heard about the microbiome maybe playing a role for inflammation. Is there any news on that? Do you have anything new, or was there anything?
I'm just going to show you something. I'm just going back to the slide of George Bertzius about progression. Look at this. And look at this number. It shows that there is no significant influence for the progression of pre-lupus to classified lupus with relation to the Mediterranean score. Yeah. So it doesn't mean it does not work, but it just means that in this specific study, it was not captured as efficient in a way.
No. So it might feel better for some patients to be on a specific diet, and that's good. But there's no real evidence of it having any indications.
I agree.
Okay, so I think I will need to go to the videos the last videos from the patients.
Okay.
So, Zoe, you go ahead.
Artificial intelligence in medicine. There are chances and challenges at once. From radiologist Leonard Jans from Belgium, from his point of view, it goes very fast. In some ways, it is beneficial. Artificial intelligence interprets scanned images, work faster, can detect lesions in joints and points images earlier, as a radiologist can notice. Artificial intelligence gives guides for rheumatologists, but it meets ethical and legal challenges. As Dr. Dennis Podubny from Germany said, it's like collection of data. Everyone must take care of data privacy, transparency and explainability, cybersecurity, intellectual property law.
I was a session considering chronic pain, and it was really surprising to know that the main reason that people seek medical care is the pain. So they will not easily go to the doctor if the pain do not occur. So actually there were many interesting things considering this research. It is validated that the inflammation is linked to the pain. So and also that the pain may persist even the inflammation is under control. The interesting thing is that there are different classes of pain. For example, nociceptive pain is the pain that arises from actual or threatened damage to non-neural tissue and is due to the activation of nociceptors. So there is also the neuropathic pain caused by lesion or disease of the somatosensory nervous system. Well, I could talk about this research for a long time, but for me, the key point here is that, well, actually, as patients, we are used to hear that everything is in our minds. So, well, pain is not in the mind, but the pain and the amount of the pain of it, if we could measure it, it occurs from the brain. So that's the key point for me.
At EULAR, I chaired one session called Buy One, Get Four Free, RMDs and comorbidities. And I wanted to give you a little bit of a recap on what we went through during that session. So we started out with Professor Baraliakos, sorry, Xenophone if I pronounced that wrong, who presented the RMDs, cancer and mental health and how they are connected. And in there we actually saw that there's an increased risk for people with RMDs to develop depression. We found a little bit on how support, mental health support and exercise actually could help with that. We also had a presentation from Jenny Christensen, who is a patient living with RMD and comorbidities in Sweden, and she explained her journey during the last 2 years, trying to get in touch with doctors, trying to get a doctor to listen to her and to diagnose her and take the right tests that needed to be taken. And we found that the communication is very important, and also the fact to make sure that the clinicians listen to their patients. So I think in the end she had 2 or 3 new comorbidities the last 2 years, one of which she actually had Googled herself and gave as a proposal to the clinician that it might be that diagnosed, and the clinician had not taken her seriously. So it just really brought up the importance of communication, which we keep going back to all the time. Next we had a presentation from Laura Campbell, who had presented a organization called Be Free that they have organized in the UK. It's a collaboration between patient and professionals, where they are the mental health support hives, as they called it. They had 5 different hives for patients with RMDs living with chronic pain, and how to be their support system to make sure that they take care of each other and for mental health issues. And that was the overall. We had some good discussions in the session when it came to just communication and how you should really make sure that you find someone, a clinician who listens to you, and most importantly, that you find a clinician that you can trust.
And we have one more from Alain. Alain and I both were at a lot of meetings and didn't see a lot of sessions, but we both had some takeaways as well.
Hello, so EULAR just finished. Here are my quick takeaways from attending this year's EULAR. And I have very few, but the first one is Lupus 100. I think that really it's been great to see Lupus 100 visibility massively improve thanks to this Congress. We distributed over 4,000 cards with the Lupus 100 references and with an explanation of what it is. It was extremely well received. Everybody knew about it. Congratulations, well done to the team that's been distributing that. Visibility of Lupus Europe was also great on site. We had a beautiful booth, very well staffed, almost always someone there ready to welcome the people, and a big interest. We had good visibility, we were on the right place, but we also had wonderful visibility on internet. And as you can see, we were one of the top influencers of EULAR. And that's great work from Nuria, but also of everyone being there and sending materials to Nuria so she could have something to fuel that influence and to drive it. Great visibility as well, thanks to our scientific activity. And we had obviously Zoe delivering a wonderful speech at the opening abstract session on Lupus 100. That was probably the best abstract of the opening session. A lot of interest, a lot of applauses. Well done. And she recommended to put Lupus 100 on prescriptions of the patients. We also had another oral abstract with Amy. Well done, Amy, on the patient advisory network. And we had posters that brought our visibility in the scientific sessions with posters on some of the outcome of lupus, living with lupus survey, and posters on Lupus 100, and a poster on patient-doctor communication gap. That was, again, visibility for Lupus Europe, which was greatly appreciated. But also, probably a first at this EULAR, we received visibility thanks to other people. And the example I'm showing there, and I've seen at least one other, I suspect there are more because I attended very few sessions, is Maarten Aringer quoting the Living with Lupus survey in his own presentation. So Maarten is the guru of classification of lupus symptoms and management. That's absolutely great. We exist, we are recognized, and that's wonderful. For me, personally, EULAR is not that much attending presentations. I attended very few, but it's a lot of contact. And this is one of my days at EULAR. And you see, it's meeting with doctors, it's meeting with industry, UCB, AstraZeneca, Otsuka, BMS, is having catch up with a lot of people. But I managed to find a bit of time to attend sessions. And one of the things that really struck me this year is how much new compounds are being analyzed. This slide, I won't elaborate a lot on it, but each name you see on that slide is one specific product that is currently investigated for lupus. And you see how many they are, and they are in different segments, different approaches at different stages of development. And it's great to see so much focus. But together comes with a concern. And the concern is, can we find enough patients to participate to those trials? Because most of the patients are not eligible for clinical trials. You only go in a clinical trial once the existing treatment typically have not delivered the right results. And so that means that it becomes tougher and tougher to find patients to go in clinical trials. One of the encouraging things is that more products are also currently identified for mild or moderate lupus, and those people typically have not been taken in clinical trials that were focused on severe lupus. But still, that is a challenge that we'll need to deal with in the future. How do we make sure that the best product goes into trial and not that we avoid using patients that are needed for some clinical trials on side less promising routes? But that's something doctors will need to work on. It's a concern for us. Another big thing has been the use of biomarkers, and biomarkers have been regularly mentioned. This is an example from Ed Vital, looking at stratification using biomarkers, but biomarkers can be used for many things, and people start to look at what can we do, and such as how to better identify if the disease is active or not, how to better identify if a flare is going to come up, or looking at what is the best product. And so Marta Alarcon also spoke about that and say, oh, can we better look at the biology of the patient to define the best response and the best way to use the various treatments, and to select the best treatment available for a patient, rather than the current trial and error point of view. So is there a profile of patient that responds better to a profile of treatment? She also mentioned biomarkers in another very interesting way, and that's also coming up, is how can we identify a flare before it's there? Are there signals in the biology that would help doctors identify that a patient might face a lupus flare in 2, 3, or 6 weeks, or maybe even longer than that, maybe up to 6 months before? And so they start to identify some markers which might help us avoid that patients ever face a flare, because we could attack the flare before it's biologically fully deployed, and therefore minimize the burden of lupus flares. Very promising route. Quite interesting. So that was the second big element, understanding how biology can help get faster to the right treatment. And then the last big thing has been for me hydroxychloroquine inviting itself again in many of the SLE sessions. While I did not attend any of the specific sessions on hydroxychloroquine, so antimalarials, at regular, almost every session I've attended, somebody raised the questions around antimalarials, and with fundamentally 2 key elements. And one is that all analysis, and the most recent analysis, point out to the fact that antimalarials are working, that they're very protective, both against hospitalization and against death. And so you see here a probability of 99.9% that antimalarials increases your survival rate, and by a factor that's quite big, because the odds ratio is 0.34. So it is a very impactful way to improve outcomes in lupus, and the same is valid for it reduces hospitalization rate. Yet the other big data, and I don't have a slide on that one, remains that many people appear not to use anti-malarials and hydroxychloroquine even when prescribed. And so that is something that we'll need to continue to work on, to identify how we better understand what's at stake, how do we find ways to make it more acceptable for patients, and how we improve the patient-doctor communication, so that when people don't take a specific medicine, they can talk it very openly and discuss that with their doctors. So those were some of my takeaways. I'll have more, because EULAR has now moved online for some of the sessions, and so I'll have time to catch up during summer on what I missed during the Congress itself.
Yes, I think it's interesting to see that you have many of the same points, actually. So it just shows that you we all are interested in the same subjects. I know that we have a few people here tonight who also would like to give us a little bit of feedback from their sessions. So Delilah, would you like to give us some feedback?
Oh, thank you so much. I think the feedbacks from you, all of you, has been great so far. I just want to add, well, first, thank you to Lupus Europe as an organization for allowing us patients to be part of this big event, which is very important. And well, we had not only the pleasure to be part of the sessions as attendees, but also to present, which is different to what we usually do. So I think that was very positive. And something to take into account is that we know that it was very difficult to enter lupus sessions, any of the sessions, as it was difficult to get lunch. So I think for next year, you have to think of bigger rooms for lupus sessions, because we have so much interest in lupus, which is needed. We really need that knowledge from everyone, and everyone. So I think that's very positive, that interest, and well, clearly that the recommendations will shape the next years, the next month and the next year. So our care, our health systems, which is really, really good. So that's what I would say so far. I have to understand my notes, my scribbles. So I see what I can get from that after.
Yeah, so maybe we'll have a video from you afterwards, maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you, Delilah. And
All
Amy,
right, thank you.
Amy, I know you also have something you want to share. And if so, we can share the slides.
That's okay. I've got them. I can share them because
okay, so you can share them. Yeah,
they were just cobbled together by me now. But I will share these. So, okay. So, as I'm recording it, I've got to make sure I see myself too. There we go. Yes. So this was my shot in Milan. It was beautiful weather when we were there. It was great. And I very much appreciate Lupus Europe kind of giving us the opportunity to be there. As I'm a visual person, I had to do it this way. I apologize. So my first EULAR presentation, which was it was about the Patient Advisory Network, which is how I joined Lupus Europe, the PAN. And actually a fellow PAN member messaged me today just saying, this is something you never could have anticipated yourself doing. So it's quite an achievement that sort of 5 years after joining, volunteering, I actually presented at EULAR, and I really appreciate the opportunity. It was an award-winning abstract by Alan that he kindly gave to me because he was scooting about doing 101 things. And then these are the sessions that I found had the most sort of resonance, I guess. I think this was my second year at EULAR, and last year, as much as I'm still interested in the scientific element, I very much focused on that in the first year. And this year, I think I did more of the quality of life wraparound sessions, especially in the PARE session. And the 0 to 100 minutes, there was a person talking about life with rheumatic diseases when you're young, which I found was really interesting. And then there was also somebody about a doctor talking about the concerns from a man's point of view with family planning, e-health for seniors, apps by prescription, and designing tech for juvenile arthritis, which seemed to be interesting. I was talking to the presenter. She was actually Sheffield, UK based, about that and how that could relate to juvenile lupus. Then You're Not Alone was about significant others, and a young person whose mother had arthritis presented. She's only 19, and that was very interesting. And then we also had Let's Talk About Sex, which I thought it was there was a lot of scientific, technical sort of elements about family planning, about sex itself, but what kind of resonated was it's interesting that it's a subject that the doctors think the patients should bring up and the patients think the doctors should bring up. And also the irony that, we can talk about bowel movements, but we can't talk about sex. Anyway, that's how I'd like to leave. I'd like to also say, no, there is one more thing after sex. Great teamwork, as we've already said. It was, such a great environment, a lot more of us there this year, a lot more sort of chance to sort of spread our influence around. And I think that really showed with the EULAR influencer position. And then a beautiful setting for the PARE family dinner, which I was kindly invited to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amy. I think that's a really great way to end the presentation.